Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Bible by the Week. We are in week 21, which covers 2 Samuel 19 to 24, 1 Chronicles 21 to 25, and some selected Psalms. When we last left David in 2 Samuel, you might remember that he had, his army had conquered Absalom, his son's rebellion against him. And even though David had ordered that Absalom's life be spared because he loved his son, nonetheless, Joab, when Absalom was caught by his hair in the branches of a tree, a low hanging tree, as he was trying to escape, Joab ordered and actually killed Absalom. And as a result of the message that Absalom had been killed, David was grieving the loss of his son Absalom instead of uh, congratulating his army, which fought for him and won the battle and restored his kingship. And so this is a total downer for the army, destroys their morale. And so Joab warns David he's got to knock it off. He's got to reconcile with his enemies, and he needs to support his troops who fought for him. So David does work to reconcile with his enemies, but he replaces Joab because Joab, the commander of his armies, had killed Absalom. He replaces Joab with Absalom's commander, Amasa. He also forgives Shimei, who you might remember as David was leaving Jerusalem. Shimei was cursing him, and David said, well, the Lord will vindicate me. Shammai repents and David forgives him. He also forgives Mephibosheth, who is Saul's, his predecessor, tried to kill him, Saul's remaining son, who is lame. And you might remember that when David was leaving Jerusalem, escaping Jerusalem, that Ziba, Mephibosheth's steward or caretaker, gave David supplies and said that Mephibosheth wasn't there because he was siding with David's son Absalom. And David, believed that, so he gave Ziba all of Mephibosheth's estate. And yet he finds out when he is back in power, Mephibosheth says, "No, no, I was getting a donkey because I'm lame and I didn't want to slow the king down and I'm totally on your side." And Ziba was the one who took advantage of the situation in order to defraud me of my estate. Now, David doesn't really know who to believe, whose word to believe in this, so he orders that Mephibosheth's estate be divided between the two. And he just doesn't know apparently who to believe. Uh, Meanwhile, while David is trying to get things back in order and restore his kingdom, he is crossing over the Jordan, and the men of Judah and Benjamin, the southern part of Israel, are helping him to get across the Jordan, and the northern tribes, the 10 northern tribes, come and they're like, "Why didn't you call us to help? You guys are taking advantage of the situation. We're just as loyal to David as you are." And they say, "No, no, no. He's from our tribe. Why are you offended by this?" It kind of indicates this growing division between the northern 10 tribes and the southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Um, and as a result of this, I think a guy whose name is Sheba turns the Israelites, the northern kingdom, against David. He takes advantage of the situation, rekindling really a civil war, even though Absalom isn't there. And he makes some great progress. So Amasa, whom David has made the leader of his army, is slow to rally Judah's troops to go after this guy Sheba. And so David sends his personal troops, his bodyguard, after Sheba under the command of Joab's brother. He's still not ready to forgive Joab. But Joab murders Amasa. Joab is such perhaps the most ruthless figure, but also the most strategic commander in all of Israel. He murders Amasa, he retakes command of the troops, and he corners Sheba at a town called Abel Abel Beth Maacah, and the town folks. He threatens the town folks, but he says, why should you die for this guy Sheba? And so they end the siege of their town by killing Sheba and tossing his head over the wall. Um, David then is in chapter 21 of First Samuel. He is Second Samuel. Sorry, he is confronted with a drought that's happening, and is led by the seers, the prophets, to understand that this was because of the Gibeonites being mistreated by Saul, and there had never been any justice for the Gibeonites. And so David allows them to avenge themselves on 7 grandsons of Saul, which just seems incredibly harsh. But it's one of those things where better for these people to suffer than for the entire nation to suffer, because who knows how many were going to die from that drought. And that's just the kind of understanding that people had, is that justice had to be done and that it was carried along in family lines. Now, you and I live in a country where we don't really understand family or generational guilt, but in the scripture, your family was an extension of you. It was a communal culture, not an individualistic culture like us. So if you did something, they well understood that if you did something that was against God, that was incredibly unjust, you were kind of poisoning your bloodline. You were destroying your whole family line. And this was the understanding. The only way to bring justice on the house of Saul was to allow the Gibeonites to avenge themselves on Saul's 7 grandsons. And that ends the drought. The wars resume against the Philistines. You remember the perpetual kind of enemies of the Israelites at this time. And then in chapter 21, it ends with us being told about Israel defeating 4 of the famous warriors of the Philistines. And then in chapter 22, there's a song of praise by David for his deliverance. 23 is kind of David's last words, or so we're told, and the deeds of his mighty men. It almost always reminds me of like the Four Musketeers or something like that, where there were certain warriors that were just renowned for their prowess in battle and their bravery and their courage. And then in chapter 24, it's mentioned that there's punishment through a plague for a census that David had ordered. Now, why would God punish them for a census? Well, the same reason that God would punish them for taking horses from Egypt and mounting chariots, which Solomon later did. We have a lot of archaeological evidence of Solomon's chariot cities. And the reason was that God's people were to be different. They were to rely not on their military strength, but on God to take care of them, protect them from their enemies, not their military strength, not their diplomatic alliances. This was to be a nation focused on God, and they were not. So then we pick up in First Chronicles chapter 21, which tells us that Satan, not God, had told King David to take this census. See, that's the thing. If God tells you to take a census, well, fine. But if Satan does, then it's evil. And Joab, the leader of his army, again, the strategist, says, why would you do this evil thing? Nothing good can come on it. This is something that God has prohibited. But David wants to count the troops. And so he orders Joab to do this. Joab resists this. He does it, but he doesn't count the Levites or the Benjaminites. So it's not a full count. And as a result, God, who speaks through his seer, through Gad, I think the prophet, and tells David, because he has taken upon himself to make this choice contrary to God's will, God's going to give him another choice as the leader of Israel, that he has his choice of 3 punishments. He can have 3 years of drought, or 3 months of Israel's enemies winning in all the battles, or 3 days of a plague, the one mentioned in 2 Samuel, that the people of Israel will suffer. And David chooses significantly to throw himself on God's mercy and says it's better if it's God who's doing this than human, because God is more merciful than humans. So this plague or pestilence over these days kills some like 70,000 people in Israel, but God doesn't allow Jerusalem to be destroyed, and he stops the angel that is leading this plague over the threshing floor of Aruna, who is a Jebusite, which is interesting because remember, the Jebusites, the Israelites had to work over and over again to try to free Jerusalem from the Jebusites who had been there before. And this tells us there were still Jebusites in Jerusalem. So this threshing floor is in Jerusalem on the top of Mount Zion. And David comes and he decides that this is the place where he will bring the tabernacle. It's been in Gibeon. He's going to bring the tabernacle there, and this is the site that he wants to build the temple on. So he tells Aruna he wants to buy this site. Aruna says, "Oh no, my lord, just take it, and if you want to do an offering here, you can slay my oxen for the offering, and you can take the threshing machine and use that for kindling." And David says, no, I'm not going to make an offering to God that doesn't cost me anything. This is kind of the way that, manipulation was done in those days, the kind of negotiation. Because if David had taken advantage of that offer, of course, not only would it not be his cost that was paying for the offering, but Aruna would have had the moral superiority over David and would have had something to come back on David with. But David wants to buy it outright, fair and square, and so he does that. And in chapter 22, he starts gathering laborers and materials and funds for the temple that's going to be built there. Remember the temple that he wanted to build for God. And he then charges Solomon, his son, that he will build the temple because Solomon will be a man of peace. David was prohibited from building it by God because he had so much blood on his hands. In chapter 23, David makes Solomon king. There's two things. There's a private audience just with some of the elders and leaders where he tells Solomon, and then there's a public recognition that Solomon will be the king to succeed David. And David organized, even the Levites are organized for service in the temple. And then chapter 24, the priests are organized. Remember, this is Chronicles, which is incredibly interested in the bloodline of David to the point where it's continually, trying to make him look good. That's why it's Satan somehow got a hold of David and had this counting. And it's very interested in the establishment of the temple and very interested in the bloodline of David because Chronicles was written after the exile in an attempt to reestablish these things and tell people how it was done and how you should do it. Even 25, even the musicians are organized. And it says, interestingly, that they prophesied or preached or proclaimed God with lyres and with harps and with cymbals. And these include famously the sons of Asaph and Jeduthun and Heman, all of whom we have psalms in which they are named as the composers of the psalms. So getting to the psalms, we have Psalm 5 this week, which is David asking God for help in the morning, in his morning prayers, and that he might have justice over his enemies. And he anticipates the future temple. Psalm 30, he exalts God for his deliverance, possibly from the plague, and apparently this psalm may have been used for the dedication of the site of the future temple. Psalm 38, we have David crying to God for relief from a painful and severe illness that he considers God's rebuke from a sin. And this is also true of Psalm 41. It's a similar psalm, prayer for relief from an illness because of sin. And then Psalm 42, right after it, the sons of Korah sing a similar song, asking God's mercy when faced with illness and with enemies, which we just heard about in 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles. There's a Psalm 57 that was in the reading for this week. It's a psalm of David asking for God's mercy, that he would take refuge in the shadow of God's wings. I point that out because there are some sects that take the Bible overly literally, as if every single word. But remember, when it talks about God's wings, that doesn't mean that he's a bird, right? That's a figurative language for just as the wings of a bird would protect its chicks. This is an image used in the Bible many times for us finding protection nestled in close to God with his wings protecting us. Psalm 95 was in this week. It's a call by the priests to come to worship and sing for joy to the Lord. It uses this image of being the people of his pasture, which is very common in the scriptures. Psalm 97, the Lord reigns above all gods. And clouds and thick darkness surround him. Fire goes before him. This is to suggest the awesomeness of God, that we can't understand God. It's not darkness in the sense of evil. It's darkness in the sense of obscurity, that we don't fully understand God, but we know that he is awesome and powerful, more powerful than any natural phenomena that we can think of. Psalm 98 talks about singing to the Lord a new song. There are no psalms that tell us to sing to God an old song. I just want to point that out because he's done marvelous things. So shout for joy, make music to him, again, with harps and with trumpets, loud sounds and shouting. This was the worship of ancient Israel. It wasn't staid people sitting in chairs and reflecting quietly. They would do that as individuals. But when they got together in the tabernacle or outside the tabernacle or the temple, it was loud and triumphant, much more like like a contemporary concert than like a little classical recital. Psalm 99, the Lord reigns. He's great and forgiving. It talks about Moses and Aaron and Samuel all calling on the Lord. Psalm 108 is David singing, "My heart is steadfast. God owns Israel's enemies. I'm going to sing and make music. With God we gain the victory." You can sense that ebullience, that powerful emotion in the Psalm of victory. Psalm 109 is David again praying for justice from his enemies who are evil. And then Psalm 110 is a coronation psalm written by David concerning the future messianic king who will be a priest forever and judge the nations. This may have been written for the coronation of Solomon. We don't know, but it very much reflects the coronation of a future messianic king. So I'm going to stop there for this week. I hope you are enjoying your readings. The Lord be with you.